Hello to all. My name is Frank, and I'm 19 years old. I want to tell you a story about girls, or more precisely, about my two girlfriends. And please trust me, I'm not showing off at all if you've already started to think that. I've only had these two girlfriends my whole life, but it just so happened that these two were more than enough. My former girlfriend has turned my life into hell, and it seems that she'll never leave me alone. So, in order to get rid of her, I have to marry my present girlfriend. I hope my bride didn't hear that. But for real, this is not funny at all. I seriously fear for my life. To begin with, when my love story just started, everything looked peaceful and even mundane, and there was nothing much to talk about. 2 years ago, my family moved to another city, and I went to a new school. I'm a very quiet, introverted person by nature. Yes, I have changed a lot since I went to college, but at that time, I was still very shy and meek, and it was very hard for me to meet new people, let alone make new friends. I only had a year left to go to this school before college, and I was mentally prepared for the life of a recluse. But it all went the other way, because Sandra appeared in my life. She herself came to me in the dining room, sat down next to me, and started some kind of careless conversation, which continued after school and carried on online when I came home. At first, Sandra and I began to talk, and then we became friends later on. After a while, Sandra herself suggested we go on a date. I had nothing against that, although I wasn't very enthusiastic about going out with Sandra. You know, the problem was that Sandra could hardly be called a pretty girl. I mean, she wasn't ugly, but nobody would call her hot. There was something about her face and her frame that prevented it. But although I didn't like the way she looked, she was intelligent and had a good sense of humor. I was really interested in her. Wasn't that way more important than her looks anyway? So, Sandra and I started dating. However, our relationship wasn't even close to my vague idea of how things should be when you have a girlfriend. Instead of lots of fun during occasional dates and sporadic kisses, for which your sweetheart and you go to the movies only to take the back seats in the most darkened corner of the movie theater, I got a girlfriend who took absolutely all of my living space and almost all of my free time. Sandra would wake me up every morning with some kind of cute greeting via text message, followed by a heart smiley. Then she would find me at school during every break, and before I went to sleep, I had to spend at least 2 hours talking to her on voice chat. Frankly, because of this, I lived in constant discomfort, and no matter how hard I tried, I still did not fall in love with Sandra, so it became harder for me to endure so much of her. At the same time, I didn't want to offend her, so I was planning how I would somehow survive, not changing anything, until our graduation. And after we finished school, we would go to colleges, preferably located not only in different cities, but hopefully also in different states. And our relationship would end by itself, naturally. Before that, I wanted to leave everything as it was, and I was planning to make it the best for Sandra at our graduation ball. I knew that this was important for her. Seems like a sound plan, right? But everything turned out in a completely different way. Sandra embarrassed me at the graduation ball. At the end of the evening, she pulled me onto the stage and publicly announced her love for me. I'm sure that this confession looked extremely ridiculous. It could not have been worse, even if she had kneeled in front of me to complete this grand gesture. Our classmates laughed at me, and although everyone forgot about this episode the very next day, I knew that the compromising photos were left somewhere in the archives of all my friends' social networks. However, I was ready to forget about this evening and move on with my life. But there came another piece of shocking news. Sandra and I had apparently enrolled at the same college. My whole plan collapsed like a house of cards, so I was forced to break up with Sandra in a very rough way. Otherwise, she wouldn't have understood anything. It was hard for me to break her heart, but it was time to put an end to this relationship. But the fun was just beginning. Life on campus was, as I expected, completely different, and soon I had a new girlfriend. Her name was Bridget. She was sweet and beautiful, and she also studied at our college. For a while, I thought that I was fine, until Sandra re-entered my life. For some reason, she acted as if she and Bridget were friends, although they had nothing in common. Sandra had told me several times before that she had no hard feelings toward me, But I still didn't like to see Sandra next to Bridget, so I directly warned my girlfriend that Sandra was my ex and that she needed to be careful about their friendship. Bridget, unlike me, was straightforward, so she simply told Sandra that she no longer wanted to be friends with her. A few days after that, someone entered Bridget's room in the dorm and cut almost all of her clothes into pieces with scissors. But what scared my girlfriend most of all was the broken doll which the intruder had left on her bed. The doll looked very much like Bridget herself. We both were sure we weren't mistaken. The resemblance was uncanny. I had no doubts that Sandra did it, so I immediately confronted her. She tried to deny everything, but suddenly burst into tears and admitted that she was still madly in love with me and would do anything to get me back if there was even the slightest chance of us to be together. And at the same time, Sandra looked, how should I say this? Not quite like herself, and bearing in mind what she had done in Bridget's room, her emotions seemed a little frightening. I began to think that Sandra was mentally ill. But I had absolutely no evidence of this, and Sandra herself, of course, considered herself to be normal. Unfortunately, I couldn't use Sandra's confession to inform the campus administration about what she had done. I had no record of this conversation, and it would only be my word against hers. In addition, Bridget didn't want to attract too much attention to us within the university. She often missed her classes and wasn't doing very well, so she didn't want to be drawn into some kind of story, since this might cause problems not only for Sandra but for her as well, or at least that's what she thought. Well, since I couldn't just call the police, I needed another way to protect myself and Bridget, so I couldn't think of any other way to do this except to ask Bridget to marry me. Of course, I wasn't sure that Bridget was the one, but at least I liked her. And it would also be a clear sign to help Sandra understand that there was simply no chance that we would get back together. I thought that the wedding was the perfect reason. Soon, Bridget and I announced our engagement to the entire student community and invited everyone to a party. Bridget was very happy. I would never have guessed that she was the type of girl who, since her childhood, had dreamt about a wedding. Not necessarily about a husband or love or anybody to spend the rest of her life with. Honestly, I even began to think that Bridget wasn't very smart. But later, I reminded myself that if I wanted to be with an evil genius, I could have just stayed with Sandra. My parents and Bridget's parents decided that they would help us rent an apartment near our college, so the party had to be held at our new home. There was nothing really special about the party, nothing to talk about. Everything was just nice until Sandra appeared. Bridget and I were nervous because we expected that she would spoil the evening, but nothing happened. On the contrary, Sandra was very sweet and happy, cheered everyone up, and the whole time wished me and Bridget all the happiness in the world. I was very surprised, or should I say, pleasantly surprised. When the guests left, I even felt a little guilty. I thought about how unfair I was to Sandra. And then I heard Bridget screaming from our bedroom. I immediately ran into the bedroom and saw what she was screaming about. The mirror above Bridget's dressing table was broken in 2 pieces, as if someone had hit it, and letters, written with red lipstick, spelled out, "This is not the end." Can you imagine how scared Bridget and I were? And not only by what she had done, but also because we simply didn't understand when or how Sandra could have managed to do this. She was always in someone's sight, and the bedroom was locked, so our guests had no access to it. After this incident, neither I nor Bridget could fall asleep, and we stayed awake for the whole night. I took a lot of pictures of the broken mirror and of the inscription on it to preserve evidence for the police. Well, Bridget panicked and insistently demanded that I get it out of our apartment as quickly as possible. Bridget didn't behave like I thought she would, but she was very grumpy, and I imagined that she would stay like this for the rest of our future family life. But no, I was more afraid of mentally unstable Sandra than of a grumpy and not super smart wife. To finally prove that Sandra was harassing us, I decided to invite her to my wedding with Bridget. I'm positive that this will provoke Sandra to take some action, and I'll be ready to protect my bride from anything that may come our way. I hope so, anyway. This is the end of my story. I still haven't reported Sandra to the police, but I'll do it as soon as I find any evidence that it was her. And if something happens to me or Bridget, I want many people to know about it. Please help me by sharing this video with your friends.